Tonight I'm making pumpkin puree. The first step obviously is to cut your pumpkin. You want to choose a pumpkin that is nice and ripe. The stem has gone brown and breaks off rather easily when you snap it off. I cut the pumpkin down the center this way. It exposes the seeds just as easily as any way else, and it's a lot easier than trying to cut through the stem and butt portion of the pumpkin. So for an example, this is a pumpkin that I've cut. First I scoop the seeds out, and then I scoop the guts out. Then I take some regular plain old vegetable oil and brush it all on this section here, on the flesh side. And then you flip them over onto the pan and pop them in the oven at 400 degrees. Generally it takes about a half an hour to 40 minutes for it to bake until it's softened, depending on the size of the pumpkin. I always use sugar pie pumpkins or pie pumpkins when I'm doing my pumpkin puree, because they tend to have the best flavor for me. Moving along quickly here, once we get the pumpkins out of the oven, they're roasted nicely and look like this. The reason we put them upside down is because they steam nicely into the skins and release the skins from the pumpkin itself. Then once the pumpkin comes out, I take my fork, as you can see I've done here, and pierce all over it to allow the steam come out for it to cool a little bit faster. Once they've cooled enough for me to handle, I just take my fork, and you can see it's still steaming a little bit, it's still a little hot. Just peel the skin right off of the pumpkin. That rind peels right off and takes all the stringy, gooey, icky stuff that you don't want in your pumpkin puree right along with it, and leaves this nice, beautiful pumpkin mash behind. Once I peel the pumpkin, I let it cool for a little bit longer. Now once the pumpkin's cooled, I transfer it into a bowl, and this is some that I've already prepared. You take it and you just take the chunks and throw it into the bowl, and then you mash it. Some people use a food processor to do this. I love my handheld immersion blender. I got this for like $10, I think, at Walmart several years ago, or Target, or wherever I bought it from. But it's a great handy little handheld tool that just jumps into the bowl and mixes everything up really nicely into a nice puree. Once you get your puree done, then it's time to start filling your jars or your containers, whatever you're going to fill. I like to use pint jars because I like to use reusable containers. This works really well with Ziploc or plastic bags, because you can easily squeeze all the air out and measure out an exact amount of what you want to use. Generally you want 2 cups for pie, and it just so happens that a pint jar is 2 cups of pumpkin puree, so I put mine in pint jars. The biggest, most important thing is to get all of the air out, and since this is a thick puree, I just kind of spoon it in a little bit at a time, and then I have my pad here because I smack my jar on the counter to just flatten everything out into the jar. And that eliminates all the air bubbles as I go. So I'll just fill and smack and just turn it in my hand and fill and smack it on the counter until it's all the way full. And I'm always messy. Then I take my towel, or a paper towel if you want to use a paper towel. I, again, like to use things that I can reuse over and over and over again. I'll wipe my jar off and wipe my rim off. With pumpkin puree, it's only 1/4 inch headspace with the jar, because you don't want to, you're not having anything covering it. Then you seal it, label it, and it goes into the freezer. There is no water bath or pressure canning approved method for pumpkin. You do have to freezer it, unless you have some type of special recipe that the USDA doesn't have. You can add seasonings to this. You can add sugar to this, however you want to. I like to can it just plain because that way you can use it in whatever recipe you want, and it doesn't have any pre-seasonings done with it. As I take out the seeds, I also wash the seeds separately, and then I will dry them and douse them in some oil and roast them after I take out the nicest seeds for next year's pumpkins to grow.